I warned my wife, if you post that photo with him, I'm out. She did, and captioned it, "My real partner." When she got back, her boss stormed in screaming about the company. His lawyer just called me. What did you make him do? Look, I'm not the kind of guy who checks his wife's Instagram every 5 minutes like some paranoid teenager stalking their crush. I've got better things to do with my time, like billable hours, cross-examining witnesses, and pretending I care about my firm's mandatory team-building retreats. But that night, that specific Tuesday night at exactly 9:42 p.m., I happened to refresh my feed while nursing my third whiskey of the evening, and there it was, glowing on my phone screen like a neon sign outside a divorce lawyer's office. The photo itself wasn't even that incriminating if you're the type who enjoys living in denial. Sarah, my wife of 7 supposedly blissful years, was sitting at some bougie wine bar with exposed brick walls and those Edison bulbs that cost more than they should. Next to her was Mark. Yeah, that Mark, the guy whose entire personality could be summed up as peaked in college but refuses to accept it. His hair was gelled back like he was auditioning for a mob movie, and his hand was casually draped over the back of her chair in that possessive way guys do when they're trying to mark their territory without actually peeing on anything. 2 wine glasses sat between them, both half empty, which I guess is poetic if you're into that whole glass half empty metaphor thing. But honestly, the drinks weren't what made my blood pressure spike. It was the caption. Oh man, the caption. If words could commit murder, these ones would be doing life without parole. With my real partner this week. My real partner? Not work partner or business partner or even partner in crime with one of those stupid winky faces that middle-aged people use when they think they're being clever. Nope, just real partner, followed by a wine emoji and a heart, a red heart. Not even the friendship heart or the ironic heart, the actual I'm emotionally invested in this person heart. I sat there on our overpriced sectional couch, the one she insisted we needed because it was Scandinavian-inspired and an investment piece, watching the likes roll in like I was monitoring stock prices during a market crash. 50 likes, 70, 100. Each one felt like a tiny knife being twisted in my gut, except instead of blood, it was just my dignity slowly leaking out onto our hardwood floors. The comment section was even better, if by better you mean absolutely soul-crushing. Her friends were eating it up like free samples at Costco. "You two look amazing," and "Power Duo," and my personal favorite, "Finally living your best life." Finally. Finally. What the hell had she been doing for the past 7 years with me? Living her mediocre life? Her barely acceptable life? Her, I guess this will do until something better comes along life? I didn't comment. That's the thing about being a lawyer. You learn real quick that the first person to react emotionally is usually the first person to lose. So instead of typing out some passive-aggressive response that would make me look like a jealous psycho, I took a screenshot. Then I took another screenshot for backup. Then I airdropped both to my laptop, saved them in 3 different folders, uploaded them to the cloud, and probably would have carved them into stone tablets if I had the tools handy. Call it paranoia. Call it thoroughness. Call it whatever you want. I call it covering your ass in a community property state. Then I poured myself another whiskey. Neat, because I'm not an animal. The funny part, and by funny I mean tragically ironic in a way that makes you question the entire institution of marriage, is that Sarah seemed to have completely forgotten who she married. I'm not some tech bro who thinks Instagram is just a place to post gym selfies and inspirational quotes stolen from dead philosophers. I'm a lawyer, specifically a corporate litigation attorney who specializes in breach of contract cases and fiduciary duty violations. I read fine print for sport. I find loopholes in my sleep. I once spent an entire weekend reviewing our mortgage documents just because I was bored and wanted to make sure the bank wasn't screwing us over. They were. I got us a better rate. So, when my wife posts a photo with another man, calls him her real partner, and thinks I'm just going to scroll past it like I'm some oblivious sitcom husband who doesn't notice when his wife comes home at midnight smelling like someone else's cologne? Yeah, no, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. I stared at that photo for probably 20 minutes, which in hindsight seems pathetic, but I needed to let it sink in. I needed to make absolutely sure I wasn't overreacting, that this wasn't just some innocent work thing that I was blowing out of proportion because I'd had too much whiskey and not enough human interaction that day. But the more I looked at it, the more certain I became. This wasn't innocent. This was a statement, a declaration, a middle finger wrapped in a wine-soaked Instagram post. The worst part? She'd been careful about it before. For months, I'd noticed the late nights, the sudden work trips, the way she'd angle her phone away from me when she was texting. But she'd never posted anything, never made it public, never been stupid enough to leave a digital paper trail that even a first-year law student could follow. It was like she'd been playing chess for months, carefully moving pieces around the board, and then suddenly decided to flip the table and set everything on fire, just for the hell of it. I picked up my phone and looked at the photo again, zooming in on Mark's smug face. This guy, this absolute waste of hair gel and misplaced confidence, I knew exactly who he was. Not just from Sarah's increasingly frequent mentions of him over the past 6 months, but from my professional life. Because here's the thing that Sarah definitely didn't know. Probably because she'd stopped asking about my work around year 3 of our marriage. Mark was currently knee-deep in a lawsuit, a big one, the kind that makes junior associates cry and senior partners order extra bottles of scotch for their offices. And guess who was on the other side of that lawsuit? Guess who was leading the plaintiff's team in what was shaping up to be a career-defining case of corporate malfeasance and breach of fiduciary duty? If you guessed the boring husband who apparently isn't her real partner, you'd be absolutely correct. I set my phone down, leaned back into our stupidly expensive couch, and smiled. Not a happy smile, not an amused smile, but the kind of smile that appears on a person's face when they realize they've been holding all the cards this entire time and didn't even know it. The kind of smile that says, "Oh, honey, you have no idea what you just did." Sarah thought she was being clever posting that photo. She thought she was making some kind of statement, asserting her independence, showing the world that she had options. What she actually did was hand me a gift-wrapped present labeled Exhibit A with a bow on top. I finished my whiskey, set the glass down on the coffee table without using a coaster, take that Scandinavian-inspired furniture, and headed to bed. Our bed, the one I'd be sleeping in alone while she was off playing house with Mr. Hair Gel at whatever conference or business trip she'd invented this week. Tomorrow, I'd go to work. I'd sit in my office with the view she always said was wasted on someone who just stares at documents all day. I'd review depositions and draft motions and do all the boring lawyer stuff that apparently made me less interesting than a guy whose entire career was built on charisma and creative accounting. But tonight, I'd sleep just fine, knowing that while Sarah thought she was living her best life with her real partner, I was about to become the realest partner she'd ever had. The kind who shows up in court with a 3-ring binder full of evidence and a smile that says, "You should have read the fine print." They say curiosity killed the cat. In my case, Instagram was about to kill a whole lot more than that. Sunday mornings started the way most Sunday mornings in our house did, with me pretending I knew how to cook something more sophisticated than scrambled eggs, and Sarah pretending she appreciated the effort. The bacon was sizzling in the cast-iron skillet we'd gotten as a wedding gift from her Aunt Margaret. The woman who'd pulled me aside at our reception to tell me that marriage was 50% love and 50% knowing when to shut up. Turns out Aunt Margaret was a prophet, because I'd been shutting up about a lot of things for the past 7 years. The coffee maker was doing its best impression of a dying car engine, gurgling and hissing like it was personally offended by having to brew dark roast at 8 in the morning. I'd already had 2 cups, because Sunday was my day to pretend I was a functional human being who had his life together, and caffeine was pretty much the only thing keeping that illusion alive. Sarah's suitcase was half-zipped on the living room floor, clothes spilling out like she'd packed in the dark while having a seizure, which, knowing her organizational skills, wasn't entirely off the table. She was sitting at our kitchen island, another investment piece that cost more than my first car, scrolling through her phone with the kind of focus usually reserved for brain surgeons and people trying to defuse bombs. Her thumbs were moving faster than her brain could possibly process information, which was pretty much Sarah's default setting these days. I could see the blue glow of Instagram reflected in her face, and I didn't need X-ray vision to know exactly what she was doing, curating her digital life to look nothing like her actual life. I flipped the bacon, watching the grease pop and sizzle, and decided to say something I'd been holding in for about 3 months. Now, I'm not a confrontational guy by nature. I save all my aggression for the courtroom, where it's billable. But there's only so much a man can take before he has to draw a line in the sand, or, in this case, in the bacon grease. "Sarah," I said, keeping my voice calm and measured, like I was explaining discovery procedures to a particularly slow paralegal. "If you post another photo with him, I'm done. No drama, no debate, just done." The words hung in the air between us like smoke, and for a second I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd actually heard me. That she'd look up from her phone, put it down, and we'd have one of those serious conversations that married couples are supposed to have when they're teetering on the edge of complete relationship collapse. But no, Sarah didn't even look up. Her eyes stayed glued to that screen like it was feeding her oxygen. And she said, with all the casual dismissiveness of someone swatting away a fly, "Relax, it's just Mark." Just Mark. Like those 2 words were supposed to magically make everything okay. Like I was being irrational for caring that my wife was spending more time with Mr. Hair Gel and Hollow Brain than she was spending with the guy she'd promised to love and cherish until death or Instagram drama did us part. Her thumbs kept moving, typing something I couldn't see but could definitely imagine. Probably another comment on one of Mark's posts, something cute and flirty disguised as professional banter. Something that all their mutual friends would see, "Wow, they have such great chemistry," while completely ignoring the fact that she had a whole entire husband at home cooking her breakfast and trying not to have a mental breakdown. I turned off the burner and transferred the bacon to a paper towel, watching the grease seep through and create little transparent circles. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Our marriage was basically that paper towel, slowly becoming saturated with all the things we weren't saying to each other, until eventually it would just fall apart in our hands. "I'm serious," I said, plating the bacon next to some scrambled eggs that looked passable if you squinted. "This isn't a joke, Sarah. I'm drawing a boundary here." She finally looked up, but only because I'd used her name twice in under a minute, which in marriage language means I'm actually serious about this and not just making conversation. Her expression was somewhere between annoyed and amused, like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum over something ridiculous like bedtime or vegetables. "Oh my God," she said, rolling her eyes so hard I'm surprised they didn't get stuck facing her brain. If eye-rolling burned calories, Sarah would be an Olympic athlete with endorsement deals and a Wheaties box. "You're being paranoid. Mark is my colleague. We work together. We're going to the same conference. It would be weird if I didn't post photos with him." The conference. Right. The business trip that had materialized approximately 2 weeks ago when Mark mentioned he was attending some networking event in San Diego. Suddenly, Sarah absolutely had to be there, even though she'd never expressed any interest in this particular conference before, and her company wasn't even officially sponsoring her attendance. She was using her own PTO for this, which should have been my first red flag, but I had been too busy trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. "It's not about posting photos," I said, setting her plate down in front of her with more force than necessary. A piece of bacon jumped like it was trying to escape, which, honestly, mood. "It's about what you're saying in those posts. It's about how you're presenting yourself and him and whatever the hell this is." She picked up a piece of bacon, examined it like it might contain hidden messages, and took a bite. "You're reading too much into social media," she said through a mouthful of pork and judgment. "It's not that deep." Not that deep. This woman, my wife, the person who once spent 45 minutes analyzing the tone of a text message from her mother, was telling me that I was reading too much into things. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife I was currently gripping a little too tightly. "Okay," I said, because arguing with Sarah when she'd already made up her mind was like trying to teach calculus to a golden retriever. Theoretically possible, but ultimately a waste of everyone's time. "I just want to be clear. I'm setting a boundary. If you post another photo with Mark, especially with some caption that implies he's more than a colleague, I'm out. I'll pack my stuff, call my lawyer friend Steve, and we'll start dividing assets like civilized adults who've realized they've made a terrible mistake." She laughed. Actually laughed, like I just told her the world's most hilarious joke instead of basically threatening divorce over breakfast. "You're so dramatic," she said, returning her attention to her phone. "Nothing's going to happen. You're worrying over nothing." I stood there watching her scroll, thumb moving in that rhythmic up-down motion that's become the universal sign of someone who's mentally checked out of their physical surroundings. The coffee maker beeped, announcing it had finished brewing, and I poured myself another cup, even though I definitely didn't need the caffeine. What I needed was a time machine, so I could go back 7 years and tell my younger self to maybe reconsider proposing to someone whose idea of communication involved emojis and Instagram stories. Sarah finished her breakfast without once putting down her phone, rinsed her plate in the sink, which, fine, at least she did that much, and disappeared into our bedroom to finish packing. I could hear her in there zipping and unzipping her suitcase, muttering to herself about which shoes matched which outfit, completely unconcerned about the fact that her husband had just delivered what amounted to an ultimatum. An hour later, she rolled her suitcase to the front door, looking like she was heading off to some glamorous adventure instead of a corporate conference that would probably consist of boring keynote speeches and awkward networking mixers with cheap wine. She changed into travel clothes, yoga pants, and an oversized sweater that somehow cost $200 because it was from some brand I'd never heard of, but apparently everyone at her office wore. "I'll be back Thursday," she said, checking her phone for probably the 100th time that morning. An Uber was apparently 3 minutes away because, God forbid, she let her husband drive her to the airport like we were some kind of functional couple. "Have fun at your conference," I said, loading the word conference with enough skepticism to sink a ship. She either didn't notice or didn't care. "Love you," she said in that automatic way people say it when it's become more of a verbal tic than an actual expression of emotion. Then she was out the door, suitcase wheels clicking against our front steps. Phone already pressed to her ear as she talked to someone who wasn't me. I stood in the doorway watching her climb into the Uber, watching the car pull away from our house, watching my marriage disappear down the street at approximately 35 miles per hour. The morning sun was bright and cheerful, completely inappropriate for the moment, and I realized that Sarah hadn't actually said where she was staying or given me any real details about this trip beyond San Diego and conference. I closed the door, walked back to the kitchen, and poured the rest of the bacon grease down the drain, even though you're not supposed to do that. Somewhere between whatever and okay, now it's personal, I'd left my emotions in that kitchen, scattered among the dirty dishes and the coffee cups and the warning that Sarah had completely ignored. She'd made her choice. She'd chosen Mark, or at least chosen the possibility of Mark over the very clear boundary I'd established. And now I had a choice to make too, whether I was the kind of guy who made empty threats or the kind who followed through. Spoiler alert, I'm a lawyer. Following through is literally what I do for a living. Here's something Sarah never bothered to learn about her husband during our 7 years of matrimonial bliss. I'm really, really good at my job. Like unhealthily good. The kind of good that makes opposing counsel break out in stress hives when they see my name on a filing. But to Sarah, I was just the boring guy who works too much and talks about contracts at dinner parties, which, fair enough, I absolutely do both those things. What she failed to grasp was that being boring and being dangerous aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, they're often the same thing wrapped in a Brooks Brothers suit. Mark Evans. Let me paint you a picture of this absolute masterpiece of mediocrity. Mid-30s, went to a state school he never shuts up about, drives a leased BMW he definitely can't afford, and has the kind of confidence that only comes from never being properly challenged in your entire life. You know the type. Guys who peaked during their fraternity days and have been coasting on charisma and strategic incompetence ever since, letting more qualified people do the actual work while they take credit during PowerPoint presentations. But here's where it gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean absolutely delicious in a way that made me question whether I believe in divine intervention. Mark wasn't just some random office bro that Sarah had developed an inappropriate attachment to. No. Mark was currently starring in his own legal drama, and not the fun kind with attractive lawyers having improbable sex in supply closets. This was the career-ending corporate malfeasance kind of drama, the kind that makes junior associates update their resumes and senior partners start practicing their "I'm shocked and disappointed" faces for the press conference. The case was Feldman Industries versus Evans and Associates, and it was exactly the kind of mess that makes litigation attorneys either run screaming or rub their hands together like cartoon villains plotting world domination. Breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of client funds, fraudulent misrepresentation, basically the greatest hits album of corporate fuck-ups. Mark's firm had been managing a portfolio worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $40 million, and apparently they decided to treat it like their personal piggy bank, making investments that benefited them way more than their clients, and generally behaving like the rules were more like friendly suggestions. And guess who was lead counsel for Feldman Industries? Guess who'd been spending the last 8 months building an airtight case that would make Mark and his partners regret every decision they'd made since deciding to go into business together? If you guessed the husband, who apparently isn't interesting enough to compete with hair gel Mark, you'd be absolutely correct. The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. While Sarah was off giggling over wine with her real partner, I was literally in the process of dismantling his entire professional existence, one deposition at a time. I had emails, bank records, internal memos that showed exactly how dirty their hands were. I had a forensic accountant who'd found discrepancies that would make the IRS weep with joy. I had witnesses who were ready to testify that Mark specifically had directed some of the most egregious violations, including a particularly stupid move where he'd invested client money in his buddy's tech startup without disclosure or authorization. The best part? I'd kept my mouth shut about all of it at home. Not because I was trying to maintain client confidentiality, although that too, but because Sarah had stopped asking about my work approximately 3 years into our marriage. She decided it was too boring and too complicated and would literally change the subject whenever I tried to discuss a case. So I'd stopped trying and she'd stopped caring. And now here we were, Her falling for a guy whose professional life I was systematically destroying, completely oblivious to the fact that her boring husband held all the cards. I kept a file on Mark at my office, one of those accordion folders that's so stuffed with evidence it barely closes. Every time I added something new, another incriminating email, another suspicious transaction, another witness statement that made Mark look more guilty than a kid with chocolate all over his face denying he ate the cookies, I'd think about Sarah and wonder how she'd managed to pick literally the worst possible person to have an emotional affair with. The preliminary hearings had already gone our way. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd seen every trick in the book and invented a few of her own, had looked at our initial filings and basically told the defense they were screwed unless they had some miracle evidence they'd been hiding. They didn't. They had Mark, whose deposition had gone about as well as the Hindenburg's maiden voyage, and a bunch of other partners who suddenly couldn't remember anything specific about who had made which decisions. My co-counsel Jennifer, a shark in a pantsuit who could smell weakness from 3 states away, had pulled me aside after one particularly brutal deposition and said, "I don't know what Mark Evans did to piss off the universe, but watching you destroy him is honestly the most entertainment I've had all year." She didn't know the half of it. She didn't know that the guy we were crushing in court was the same guy currently helping my wife pack for business trips and posing for Instagram photos with captions that made my blood pressure spike. I thought about telling Jennifer, about letting her know that this case had gotten weirdly personal, but that would have required admitting that my marriage was circling the drain, and I wasn't quite ready for that conversation. Plus, it didn't matter. Personal feelings aside, Mark and his firm had violated their fiduciary duty in ways that would make Enron executives shake their heads in disapproval. They deserved everything that was coming to them, and I was more than happy to be the delivery system. The trial was scheduled for 6 weeks out, which meant we were in the final prep phase, the part where you dot every I and cross every T and make absolutely certain that when you walk into that courtroom, you're not just prepared, you're weaponized. I had associates pulling all-nighters to review documents. I had our jury consultant working on profiles for voir dire. I had demonstrative exhibits that would make Mark's financial misconduct so obvious that even the most legally illiterate juror would understand exactly what he'd done. And through it all, through every late night and every strategy session and every moment where I fantasized about the look on Mark's face when the verdict came down, I kept thinking about Sarah, about how she'd chosen this guy, this walking malpractice lawsuit, over me, about how she'd looked at my stable, boring, successful career and found it lacking compared to whatever the hell Mark brought to the table besides hair gel and federal crimes. The thing about being a lawyer, especially a litigator, is that you learn to compartmentalize. You learn to separate your emotions from your work, to be objective even when you desperately want to be petty. But I'm only human, and I'd be lying if I said that every time I added another piece of evidence to our case, every time I found another way that Mark had screwed up, I didn't feel a little thrill of vindictive satisfaction. Sarah thought Mark was successful. She thought he was this big-shot financial advisor with important clients and a promising future. She had no idea that his career was held together with duct tape and prayer, and that I was currently in the process of removing both. She saw the Instagram version of Mark, the expensive suits, the wine bars, the confident smile. She didn't see the discovery responses that read like a confession, or the way he'd fumbled through his deposition like a freshman giving a book report on a book he hadn't read. I'd been quiet for months about all of it. Quiet about the case, quiet about my knowledge of Mark's professional disasters, quiet about the fact that I was literally the worst-case scenario for anyone who decided to fuck with both my marriage and my legal opponent. But Sarah's little Instagram stunt had changed the calculus. She'd gone from privately disrespecting our marriage to publicly declaring that someone else was her real partner. And that shifted things from personal problem to problem that requires professional solutions. See, the thing about being in the shadows is that nobody sees you coming. They're too busy looking at the spotlight, at the obvious threats, at the things that are right in front of their faces. They don't notice the guy in the corner taking notes, building cases, connecting dots. They don't notice until it's too late, until the trap has already snapped shut and they're wondering how the hell they ended up there. Mark had no idea who I was beyond Sarah's husband. And even that was probably a generous assessment of how much mental space I occupied in his brain. To him, I was probably just some nebulous concept, an obstacle that could be ignored or worked around. He definitely didn't know that I'd spent the better part of a year learning everything about his business practices, his financial decisions, his pattern of cutting corners and hoping nobody would notice. But I noticed. I always notice. That's literally what they pay me for. And now, sitting in my office on a Monday morning, looking at the file that would probably end Mark's career, I realized something. Sarah had accidentally given me the perfect gift. She'd connected herself publicly to a guy who was about to become professionally radioactive. She'd tied her reputation to someone whose name would soon be synonymous with corporate fraud and breach of duty. The quiet guy who reads fine print for sport was about to get very, very loud. Midnight is an interesting time to make life-altering decisions. It's late enough that all the reasonable people are asleep, but early enough that you can't blame it on sleep deprivation. It's that sweet spot where your inhibitions are low, but your cognitive function is still mostly operational, which is either the best or worst time to do something you can't take back, depending on how you look at it. I was sitting at my home office desk, the one Sarah always complained about because apparently it didn't match the aesthetic of our living room, as if aesthetics mattered more than having a functional workspace. Staring at my laptop screen with a cup of coffee that had gone cold about an hour ago. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood, which in any other context would have been peaceful, but right now just felt ominous. Like the universe was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do next. Sarah's Instagram post was still up, of course, still collecting likes like they were going out of style, still broadcasting to the world that Mark was her real partner, while I was presumably the fake one, the practice round, the guy she'd settled for before she knew better. I'd looked at it approximately 700 times since she'd posted it, which was definitely not healthy behavior, but also felt necessary, like picking at a scab to make sure it still hurt. But I wasn't looking at Instagram anymore. I was looking at an email draft I'd been composing and deleting and recomposing for the past 2 hours. The subject line was simple, professional, and absolutely devastating if you understood what it meant. Conflict of interest, immediate review required. Now, let me explain something about the legal profession that non-lawyers don't always understand. We have ethics rules, lots of them. They're boring and complicated, and most people ignore them until they can't, at which point they become the only thing that matters. One of the big ones involves conflicts of interest, situations where your personal relationships might compromise your professional judgment or create the appearance of impropriety. And boy, oh boy, did Sarah and Mark's little wine bar photo session create an appearance of impropriety. The email I was drafting wasn't to Sarah, it wasn't to Mark, it was to Margaret Winters, the general counsel at Hendricks & Associates, the firm where both Sarah and Mark worked. Margaret was one of those terrifyingly competent lawyers who'd probably sold her soul to the devil in exchange for perfect legal instincts and the ability to function on 4 hours of sleep. She was also notoriously paranoid about anything that might expose the firm to liability, which made her exactly the right person for what I was about to do. I took a sip of cold coffee, grimaced, and started typing the final version. Dear Miss Winters, I hope this email finds you well. I'm writing to bring to your attention a potential ethics concern that may require immediate review by your firm's compliance department. As you may be aware, I serve as lead counsel for Feldman Industries in the ongoing litigation against Evans & Associates, case number 2024-CV8847. It has recently come to my attention that Mark Evans, a named defendant in this action, maintains a close professional and personal relationship with Sarah Henderson, an employee of Hendricks & Associates who works in the same division. I've attached several pieces of evidence that suggest this relationship may create conflicts of interest regarding client confidentiality, particularly given that Hendricks & Associates has clients with overlapping business interests to those involved in the litigation. Additionally, the public nature of their association, see attached social media posts, may create reputational risks for your firm should the case proceed to trial and receive media attention. I want to be clear that I'm not making any accusations of wrongdoing. However, in the interest of maintaining the integrity of ongoing legal proceedings and out of respect for your firm's reputation, I felt it necessary to flag this situation for your review. Please let me know if you require any additional information or documentation. Best regards, my name, Senior Partner, Morrison & Blackwell, LLP. I read it 3 times, checking for typos and making sure the tone was exactly right. Concerned but not accusatory, professional but not cold, helpful but definitely not actually helpful. It was a masterpiece of legal passive aggression, the kind of email that says, "I'm just trying to help," while actually saying, "I'm about to ruin everyone's day and there's nothing you can do about it." The attachments were even better. I'd included screenshots of Sarah's Instagram post, naturally, with the timestamp and caption clearly visible. But I'd also done some digging, because insomnia and spite are a powerful combination, and found 3 other photos she'd posted over the past 2 months featuring Mark. Lunch meetings, coffee breaks, a company happy hour where they were standing just a little too close to be strictly professional. Individually, none of them meant anything. Together, they painted a picture of 2 people who were way more invested in each other than their respective roles should allow. And in the world of corporate legal compliance, perception is pretty much reality. It doesn't matter if nothing inappropriate actually happened. If it looks sketchy, it is sketchy, and firms like Hendricks & Associates don't mess around when it comes to anything that might end up in a deposition someday. I also attached a document outlining the case against Evans & Associates, highlighting the specific allegations against Mark and the potential exposure if the case went to trial. I made sure to emphasize the parts about fiduciary duty violations and the likelihood of significant media coverage, because nothing scares corporate counsel more than the possibility of their firm's name appearing in the Wall Street Journal next to words like scandal and misconduct. The beauty of this approach was its deniability. I wasn't accusing Sarah of anything. I wasn't even accusing Mark of anything beyond what was already in the public record via court filings. I was simply bringing a potential conflict to the attention of someone whose job was to worry about potential conflicts. I was being helpful, proactive, a concerned colleague looking out for the integrity of the legal profession. The fact that this would almost certainly trigger an internal investigation that would make Sarah's life a living hell for the next few weeks, well, that was just an unfortunate side effect of me being a responsible attorney. My cursor hovered over the send button. This was it, the point of no return. Once I sent this email, there was no taking it back, no pretending it was a joke, no sorry I was drunk and made a mistake. This would set off a chain of events that I couldn't control, even if I could predict them with reasonable accuracy. I thought about Sarah, probably asleep in whatever hotel room she'd booked for her conference, completely unaware that her boring husband was about to weaponize 7 years of legal expertise against the man she decided was her real partner. I thought about Mark, who definitely didn't know that the guy suing him was married to his new favorite colleague. I thought about all those Instagram likes, all those comments from people who thought they were so clever and supportive, completely oblivious to the fact that social media posts are discoverable in litigation. Then I thought about Sarah's face when I'd warned her at breakfast, the way she dismissed me like I was being paranoid and dramatic. The way she'd laughed at my boundary, like the idea of me actually following through on anything was so absurd it didn't deserve serious consideration. I clicked send. The email whooshed away into the digital void, and I sat back in my chair feeling a weird mix of satisfaction and nausea, like I'd just jumped off a cliff and wasn't sure if I'd remembered to pack a parachute. The timestamp on the sent email read 12:47 a.m., which felt appropriate somehow. Early enough to be premeditated, late enough to have plausible deniability about my mental state. I closed my laptop and just sat there for a minute, listening to the silence of our house, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Margaret Winters was notorious for checking her email at ungodly hours, one of those people who wore sleep deprivation as a badge of honor. So there was a decent chance she'd see this before sunrise, which meant that by the time Sarah woke up in San Diego, completely oblivious and probably planning to post more photos with Mark, the wheels would already be in motion. In legal dramas, this is the part where someone would pour themselves a whiskey and stare meaningfully out a window while contemplating the gravity of what they'd just done. But this wasn't a legal drama. This was just Tuesday night turning into Wednesday morning. And I was just a guy who'd gotten really tired of being treated like he didn't matter. I didn't pour a whiskey. I made a fresh cup of coffee, because I had work in the morning, and spite doesn't pay the bills. But as I stood in the kitchen waiting for the coffee maker to do its thing, I couldn't help but smile. Not a big smile, not a villain's grin, just a small, satisfied smirk at the thought of what was about to happen. See, in law, you don't yell fire and cause panic. That's crude, obvious, likely to backfire. Instead, you light a small candle, place it in exactly the right spot, and then wait patiently for the sprinklers to lose their minds. You don't attack directly. You create conditions where the system attacks itself, where policies and procedures and paranoid general counsels do all the heavy lifting for you. I just lit the candle. Now, all I had to do was wait for the sprinklers to kick in and watch everything burn. If there's one thing I've learned from 15 years of practicing law, it's that corporate lawyers move at exactly two speeds: glacially slow when you need something done, and apocalyptically fast when they smell potential liability. Margaret Winters, as it turned out, was firmly in the latter category when my email hit her inbox at approximately 3:47 a.m., which I know because she responded at 4:12 a.m. with a message that simply read, "Received. Taking immediate action. Will follow up shortly." 25 minutes. To read my email, verify the attachments, probably consult whatever crisis management protocol Hendricks and Associates kept in a binder labeled "oh shit scenarios," and craft a response. That's efficiency born from pure terror. And I respected it, even as I enjoyed it immensely. By 9 in the morning, Mark's inbox was apparently lighting up like a Christmas tree in July. I know this because Jennifer, my co-counsel, who has sources everywhere like some kind of legal intelligence operative, texted me during my morning coffee with a screenshot she'd gotten from someone who knew someone in Mark's office. The subject lines were incredible. Urgent, disclosure request, immediate response required. Ethics inquiry, confidential. Internal audit notification, and my personal favorite, schedule emergency meeting potential breach. Mark, according to Jennifer's source, had walked into his office that morning expecting a normal Wednesday, probably planning to send Sarah some flirty text about their upcoming evening plans or whatever, and instead got hit with what amounted to a corporate audit Zamboni. Every email was marked high priority. Every sender was someone whose title included words like compliance or risk management or internal affairs, the kind of people you never want to hear from unless they're telling you that everything's fine and you can go back to ignoring them. "This is beautiful," Jennifer had texted. "What did you do?" "Who says I did anything?" I'd responded, because plausible deniability is important even in casual text conversations. "You did something. This has your fingerprints all over it. Very professional, very subtle, absolutely devastating. I'm taking notes." I didn't confirm or deny anything, just sent back a shrugging emoji and went back to reviewing depositions. But internally, I was doing a victory lap. Not because I enjoyed Mark's suffering. Okay, fine, I enjoyed it a little, but because the system was working exactly as designed. I hadn't broken any rules. I hadn't made false accusations. I'd simply informed the appropriate parties of a potential conflict of interest, and they'd responded with the kind of thorough investigation that makes everyone involved wish they'd made better life choices. Meanwhile, Sarah was somewhere in San Diego living her best life, completely oblivious to the fact that her professional world was currently imploding back home. According to her Instagram stories, yes, I was still checking them like a masochist with a smartphone, she was at some conference keynote about disrupting traditional client relationships, or some other buzzword-heavy nonsense. She'd posted a photo of her coffee cup next to her conference badge with a caption about learning and growing, which would have been inspirational if I didn't know that in about 6 hours she was going to get a phone call that would make her wish she'd stayed home and learned to take her husband seriously instead. The real beauty of what I'd set in motion was that it didn't require my continued involvement. Corporate compliance departments are like sharks. Once they smell blood in the water, they don't stop circling until they've investigated every possible angle. Margaret Winters and her team would be pulling email records, reviewing Sarah and Mark's calendar appointments, checking expense reports to see if they'd ever been to the same client meetings or charged meals to the same accounts. They'd be looking for any possible overlap that could be construed as a conflict of interest or, even worse, a breach of client confidentiality. And here's the thing, they'd probably find stuff. Not because Sarah or Mark had necessarily done anything intentionally wrong, but because when you work closely with someone and start developing inappropriate feelings for them, you make small compromises. You share information you shouldn't. You attend meetings together that one of you should sit out. You let personal feelings influence professional judgment in ways that seem harmless until someone with a legal degree and a mandate to protect the firm starts asking uncomfortable questions. By noon, Jennifer forwarded me another update. Mark had been called into an emergency meeting with 3 partners and someone from HR. The meeting had lasted over 2 hours. When he'd emerged, according to her source, he looked like someone who just received news that his dog died, his car was totaled, and his house was on fire all at the same time. They've put him on administrative leave, pending the investigation, Jennifer's text read. Not fired, but definitely benched. Your timing on this case is chef's kiss. Administrative leave. The corporate equivalent of being sent to your room to think about what you've done. It meant they'd found something concerning enough to remove him from active client work, but not quite damning enough to terminate him immediately. It meant lawyers were reviewing everything with a fine-tooth comb, trying to figure out how much liability the firm was facing and whether they needed to disclose anything to clients or regulators. It also meant that Mark's defense in our lawsuit just got significantly more complicated. How do you mount an effective legal defense when you're not allowed to access your own files? When your firm is treating you like radioactive waste? When everyone you work with is suddenly very interested in maintaining documentation of every interaction they've ever had with you just in case they need to testify later? The answer is, you don't. You settle, or you lose spectacularly, or you declare bankruptcy and hope everyone forgets your name. Those are pretty much the only options once the sharks start circling. But the real domino that made me actually laugh out loud in my office, like genuine laughter that made my paralegal knock on my door to ask if I was okay, was the automated system. See, Hendricks & Associates, like most major firms, had implemented one of those AI compliance monitoring systems that's supposed to catch potential problems before they become actual problems. It's basically Big Brother with an algorithm, scanning emails and calendar invites and even social media for anything that might indicate a compliance issue. And apparently Sarah's Instagram post had triggered it. Jennifer sent me another screenshot around 2 p.m., this one showing an automated alert that had gone out to the compliance team. The AI had detected Sarah's public social media posts, matched them against Mark's employee profile, cross-referenced both their names against active litigation databases, and flagged the whole situation as high-risk, potential conflict/reputational damage. It had even included a risk score, 8.7 out of 10, which in compliance terms is basically drop everything and deal with this immediately. The AI had done my job for me, which was both hilarious and slightly terrifying from a "our robots are coming for our jobs" perspective. It had found additional photos that even I hadn't noticed. Sarah and Mark in the background of other people's posts, tagged at the same locations, commenting on each other's content with the kind of familiarity that the algorithm correctly identified as inconsistent with a purely professional relationship. AIs don't sleep, don't gossip, don't care about anyone's feelings. They just methodically ruin careers based on pattern recognition and risk assessment. It's beautiful in its own cold, digital way. By 3 o'clock, the compliance department had apparently expanded their investigation to include everyone in Sarah and Mark's division, just to make sure there weren't any other ticking time bombs waiting to explode, which meant that approximately 40 people were now getting emails asking them to preserve all communications, prepare for potential interviews, and generally live in a state of low-grade panic about whether they'd accidentally done something that could be construed as unethical. Sarah's boss, a woman named Patricia who I'd met exactly once at a company holiday party where she'd spent 20 minutes talking about her Peloton, was reportedly having a meltdown of epic proportions. Not only did she have 2 employees under investigation, but the investigation was connected to a major lawsuit that could potentially impact client relationships. She'd been calling people into her office one by one, demanding to know who knew what and when they knew it, like she was starring in her own paranoid thriller. And through all of this, Sarah was still in San Diego, still posting Instagram stories about networking sessions and panel discussions, still completely oblivious to the mushroom cloud forming over her professional life. Part of me, a small, petty part that I'm not particularly proud of, wanted to call her and give her a heads up. But a larger part of me, the part that remembered her dismissive, "relax, it's just Mark," and her eye roll at my very reasonable boundary, decided that some lessons are best learned without advance warning. Besides, Margaret Winters would call her soon enough, probably scheduled it for maximum impact. Late enough in the day that Sarah couldn't catch an immediate flight home, but early enough that she'd spend the entire evening in her hotel room panicking instead of enjoying whatever conference activities she'd planned. I imagined her phone ringing, seeing Hendricks and Associates, General Counsel on the caller ID, and feeling that initial spike of confusion, followed by slowly dawning horror as Margaret explained the situation in her crisp, no-nonsense voice. The request to return immediately. The notification that she was being placed on paid leave pending investigation. The suggestion that she might want to retain personal counsel just as a precaution. If irony had a face, it would be sitting in a hotel bar in San Diego right now, sipping an overpriced latte with almond milk, about to receive the phone call that would make every previous bad day look like a minor inconvenience. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and allowed myself a moment of pure, uncomplicated satisfaction. I hadn't yelled, hadn't made threats, hadn't done anything except follow proper professional protocols and let the system do what it was designed to do. Sometimes, revenge isn't about dramatic confrontations or elaborate schemes. Sometimes, it's just about knowing exactly which domino to push and then getting out of the way while physics does the rest. 4 days. That's how long it took for Sarah to come crawling back from her amazing conference that had turned into a professional dumpster fire. 4 days of increasingly panicked phone calls with HR. 4 days of her blowing up my phone with messages I mostly ignored. 4 days of me going about my business like nothing was happening while her entire world crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide. I'd used those 4 days productively. Changed the locks, all of them. Front door, back door, even the side entrance she never used, but insisted we needed because what if we want to add a patio someday? Called a locksmith named Tony, who showed up in a van covered in key-shaped decals and didn't ask a single question when I told him my wife and I were going through some things. God bless Tony and his professional discretion. I also spent those 4 days preparing what I can only describe as the world's most passive-aggressive welcome home gift. Not flowers, not wine, not a "we need to talk" note scrawled on notebook paper like some amateur. No, I prepared documentation. Evidence, a carefully curated collection of consequences packaged in a manila envelope that I placed on the guest room bed like a hotel mint, except instead of chocolate, it was filled with the bitter taste of reality. When Sarah's Uber pulled into our driveway Thursday afternoon, I was sitting in the living room with a glass of water. Not whiskey, because I wanted to be completely sober for this. Watching through the window like I was observing some nature documentary. And here we see the unfaithful spouse returning to her natural habitat, completely unaware that the ecosystem has fundamentally changed in her absence. She looked tired. Good. Her rolling suitcase sounded like thunder against our front walkway, and I could hear her fumbling with her keys before she even reached the door. The confusion started immediately when her key wouldn't turn. She tried it again. Then again, harder, like maybe the lock was just being stubborn and needed some aggressive persuasion. "What the hell?" I heard her mutter through the door. I took a slow sip of water, counted to 5, then walked over and opened the door casually, glass still in hand, wearing the most neutral expression I could manage. "Hey," I said, like we were neighbors who just happened to run into each other at the mailbox. She blinked at me, her keys still extended like she was trying to unlock an invisible door. "My key doesn't work." "Yeah, I changed the locks." I said it the same way you'd mention that you changed the oil in the car or bought a new brand of coffee. Just a basic household update. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic. "You what?" Her face was doing this incredible journey through about 6 different emotions at once. Confusion, anger, disbelief, and something that might have been fear if she was capable of self-awareness. "Changed the locks. You know, the metal cylinder things that keep doors secure. I had them replaced." I stepped aside to let her in because I'm not a monster, just a man with boundaries and a newly developed sense of pettiness. She rolled her suitcase inside, and I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Could have been from exhaustion, could have been from the 3 phone calls she'd had with Margaret Winters, could have been from the slowly dawning realization that her life had gone from Instagram perfect to legally complicated in less than a week. "This is insane," she said, dropping her bag in the entryway and turning to face me. "We need to talk about what's happening. Do you have any idea what they're doing to me at work?" "No idea," I lied smoothly. "What are they doing to you at work?" She launched into this whole explanation that I'd already heard from Jennifer, but pretended was news to me. The investigation, the administrative leave, the questions about her relationship with Mark, the implication that she might have violated client confidentiality or ethics policies. She talked fast, words tumbling over each other like she was trying to get them all out before I could interrupt, before I could confirm what she probably already suspected deep down, that this was somehow my fault. I let her finish, nodded sympathetically in all the right places, made appropriate "that sounds stressful" noises, while internally composing my Oscar acceptance speech for best performance by a husband who absolutely knew this was coming. "And the worst part," she continued, tears starting to form because apparently we were doing the crying thing now, "is that they're treating me like I did something wrong, like I committed some crime by being friends with a colleague." "Friends," I repeated, tasting the word like it was wine I was about to spit out. "Is that what we're calling it? What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, setting my water glass down on the coffee table, because screw it, we were past worrying about water rings, that you posted a photo calling him your real partner while you were married to your actual partner. It means you ignored a very clear boundary I set. It means you made your personal life public in a way that created professional consequences. And now you're surprised that actions have consequences? She wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara in a way that would have made her horrified if she could see herself. You don't understand. Mark and I were just... I don't care, I interrupted, which felt incredibly satisfying. I really, genuinely don't care what you and Mark were just doing. What I care about is that you disrespected our marriage publicly, ignored my warning, and now you're facing the consequences of your choices. My choices? Her voice went up about 3 octaves. You think I chose this? You think I wanted my career to implode? I think you chose to post that photo. I think you chose to go on that trip despite me explicitly asking you not to. I think you chose Mark over me, and now you're upset that choosing has consequences. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Where is this coming from? You've never been like this. You're always so calm, so understanding. Yeah, well, maybe I got tired of being understanding. I gestured toward the hallway. You'll be staying in the guest room, by the way. I already moved some of your stuff in there. The guest room? Are you serious right now? Dead serious. This is called a boundary, Sarah. You should get familiar with the concept. She looked like she wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have told her that this wasn't a negotiation. She grabbed her suitcase with more force than necessary and stalked down the hallway toward the guest room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like little angry exclamation points. I waited exactly 2 minutes, timed it on my watch like I was conducting a scientific experiment, before I heard the scream. Not a scared scream, more like the sound a person makes when they open a gift and find a live snake inside. I walked down the hallway casually, still carrying my water, and found Sarah standing in the doorway of the guest room, staring at the bed like it had personally insulted her. On the perfectly made guest bed, I'd even done hospital corners because if you're gonna be petty, be thorough about it, sat a thick manila envelope. The kind lawyers use for important documents, the kind that means your life is about to get significantly more complicated. What is this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That, I said, leaning against the doorframe, like we were having a casual conversation about weekend plans, is our prenuptial agreement, updated last year, which you might remember if you'd actually read it before signing, but you didn't read it, did you? You just signed where I put the little sticky arrows because you trusted me, or you didn't care, or you assumed it was all standard boilerplate that didn't matter. She picked up the envelope with trembling hands, pulled out the document. I'd helpfully flagged the relevant sections with bright yellow post-it notes because I'm nothing if not organized, and started reading. I watched her face as she got to Clause 7B, the one I'd highlighted in yellow marker with the intensity of a student studying for the bar exam. Her eyes moved back and forth, reading it once, then again, then a third time, like maybe the words would change if she just concentrated hard enough. In case of public actions causing reputational harm, she read aloud, her voice getting smaller with each word, including, but not limited to, extramarital behavior or public scandal, the unaffected spouse may freeze joint assets pending divorce proceedings or reconciliation. She looked up at me, and I swear I could see the exact moment the reality of her situation hit her like a freight train. You froze our accounts? Our accounts? No. My accounts that you have access to? Yes. Your personal checking is still fine. But the joint savings, the investment accounts, the credit cards tied to my name, all frozen pending, let's call it, a reassessment of our marital status. You can't do that. Actually, I can. It's right there in the prenup you signed without reading. Page 17, Clause 7B, subsection 3. Want me to read it to you? I've got the whole thing memorized at this point. Sarah sank onto the guest bed, still holding the prenup like it was evidence in a murder trial, and she'd just realized she was the suspect. "This is insane! You're being insane!" "No, I'm being prepared. There's a difference." I took another sip of water, mostly for dramatic effect. "See, when you marry a lawyer, Sarah, you should probably assume that they've thought through every possible scenario. You should probably assume that they've protected themselves legally from exactly this situation. And you should definitely read documents before you sign them." Her face was going through this incredible color transformation from pale to pink to red, like a time-lapse of anger. "How long have you been planning this?" "Planning what? Protecting my assets in case of marital breakdown? Since before we got married. It's called being responsible." I paused. Let that sink in. "But if you're asking when I decided to actually enforce these provisions, that would be when you posted that photo with Mark and called him your real partner." "I didn't mean it like that." Doesn't matter how you meant it. Matters how you said it. Matters that you said it publicly. Matters that you did it after I explicitly warned you not to. I pushed off from the doorframe, done with this conversation. Take your time reading through everything. There's a summary on page 3 if the legal language is too complicated. Feel free to call a lawyer if you want a second opinion, though I should warn you that most of them will tell you the same thing I'm telling you. You signed this, it's enforceable, and you're pretty much screwed. I started to walk away, then turned back like I'd just remembered something. "Oh, and Sarah, that amazing conference you went to? Might want to check your work email. I hear they have some questions about expense reports and whether company funds were used appropriately for your little wine bar photo shoot with Mark." Her face went from red to white so fast I briefly worried she might pass out. "How do you know about—" "I'm a lawyer, sweetheart. Knowing things is literally what I do." I gave her a smile that was about as warm as a January morning. Welcome home. Then I walked back to the living room, sat down on our Scandinavian-inspired couch, and finished my water while listening to Sarah sob in the guest room. Some people might call this cruel. I call it consequences served with a side of legally binding documentation. Friday morning arrived with the kind of aggressive cheerfulness that makes you want to personally fight the sun. Birds chirping, light streaming through the windows, the neighbor's dog barking at absolutely nothing. It was one of those mornings that felt designed to mock anyone having a bad week. And Sarah was definitely having a bad week. I was in the kitchen making breakfast. Actual breakfast, not the sad protein bar and coffee combo I usually settled for, when I heard her bedroom door open. Guest bedroom door, I should say, because apparently that clarification mattered now. She emerged looking like she'd either not slept at all or had been crying so hard that sleep was just a distant memory, like a vacation she took once in college. Her hair was doing this thing where it looked both flat and frizzy at the same time, which I didn't know was possible, but Sarah was apparently pioneering new frontiers in stress-induced bad hair days. She was wearing an old college sweatshirt and pajama pants, the kind of outfit that screams, "I've given up on everything," including basic grooming standards. "Morning," I said cheerfully, flipping a pancake with the kind of casual domesticity that probably seemed psychotic given our current situation. "Want some breakfast?" She stared at me like I'd offered her a live grenade. "How are you so calm right now?" "Practice," I said, sliding the pancake onto a plate, "also therapy, and a general philosophy that freaking out doesn't actually solve problems. It just makes you tired and dehydrated." She opened her mouth to respond, probably with something cutting and emotional, but her phone rang. Not the normal ringtone either, the loud, aggressive one she'd set for work calls so she wouldn't miss them. The ringtone that meant someone important is calling and you better answer or face consequences. Sarah looked at her phone screen and I watched her face do that thing where all the blood drains out and you briefly wonder if someone needs medical attention. "It's Patricia," she whispered, like saying it quietly would somehow make it less real. Patricia, her boss, the Peloton enthusiast who was currently dealing with the fallout of having 2 employees under investigation and probably hadn't slept properly in a week either. This was going to be good. "You should probably answer that," I said helpfully, pouring maple syrup on my pancakes in a spiral pattern, because if you're going to watch your wife's life implode, you might as well have a nice breakfast while doing it. Sarah hit the answer button and immediately put it on speaker, probably because her hands were shaking too much to hold the phone properly. "Hello?" What came through that speaker wasn't a voice so much as a sonic weapon. Patricia was screaming, not yelling, not speaking loudly, but full-on screaming, like she'd just discovered her house was on fire and all the exits were blocked. "Sarah, what the hell did you do? The company is losing its mind. His lawyer just called me. What did you make him do?" I nearly choked on my pancake. Not because of the content, I'd expected this call eventually, but because of the sheer volume and rage. Patricia sounded like she was having a full meltdown in real time, like someone had taken all her carefully managed corporate composure and set it on fire while dancing around it chanting, "Everything is terrible." Sarah's face had gone from pale to green, like she was about to either throw up or pass out, possibly both. "Wait, what? What lawyer?" "The plaintiff's counsel, the guy suing Mark. He called the general counsel. He sent emails. He provided evidence. Your post, your Instagram post complicates the entire case." I took another bite of pancake, chewing slowly, watching Sarah's brain try to process what was happening. It was like watching someone try to solve a Rubik's Cube while wearing oven mitts. Technically possible, but mostly just painful to observe. I didn't say anything," Sarah stammered, her voice going up in pitch like a balloon deflating. "I just posted a photo. That's not illegal." "You didn't have to say anything." Patricia was really hitting her stride now. The kind of rage that comes from a week of dealing with compliance officers and general counsels and probably not enough coffee. "You posted it. You put it on the internet. Do you have any idea how discovery works? Do you understand what evidence means?" Sarah looked at me, and I saw the exact moment she connected the dots. Her eyes widened like she'd just seen a ghost. Except the ghost was me, and I was sitting at our kitchen island, eating pancakes with the satisfied expression of someone who just won a very long game of chess. "You," she whispered, the phone call still raging in the background. "You did this?" I shrugged, cut another piece of pancake. "I informed the appropriate parties of a potential conflict of interest. That's called being a responsible member of the legal community." I gestured with my fork. "Also, your boss is still talking." She jerked her attention back to the phone, where Patricia had transitioned from screaming to what I can only describe as aggressive panic. "And the board wants answers. They want to know how this happened. They want to know why nobody caught this sooner. They want to know if we need to notify clients. Do you understand what you've done, Sarah? Do you?" "Patricia, please, I can explain," Sarah started, but she might as well have been trying to reason with a hurricane. "Explain? Explain what? That you were too stupid to understand that social media posts are public? That you were too busy playing house with a guy who's currently being sued for $40 million to think about professional boundaries? That you made the firm look like a joke?" I got up to pour myself more coffee, giving Sarah space for her professional execution, while also staying close enough to hear every word. This was better than any TV show I'd ever watched. This was live-action consequences in real time, and I was here for every second of it. "I didn't know," Sarah tried again, tears streaming down her face now, mixing with the stress and exhaustion and slowly dawning realization that she'd screwed up in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. "You didn't know?" Patricia's voice somehow got even louder, which I didn't think was physically possible. Your husband is a lawyer? He's literally leading the case against Mark. How did you not know? How did you not think that maybe, just maybe, posting romantic photos with a defendant might be a problem? Sarah's eyes met mine across the kitchen, and I raised my coffee mug in a little toast. She looked away quickly, like eye contact might turn her to stone. I didn't think, she whispered into the phone. No, you didn't think. That's the problem. Patricia took a breath, and I could hear her trying to regain some composure, trying to sound like a professional manager instead of someone having a complete breakdown. Sarah, I need you to listen very carefully. The firm is conducting a full investigation, internal audit, ethics review, the whole 9 yards. And, based on what they found so far, the pause was excruciating. I actually stopped mid-sip to pay attention. Based on what they found, we're going to have to let you go. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Sarah's face went through about 12 different emotions in 3 seconds. Shock, disbelief, anger, fear, and finally something that looked like acceptance mixed with absolute devastation. You're firing me? Her voice was barely a whisper. We're terminating your employment due to reputational risk and potential ethics violations. HR will send you the paperwork. We'll need your laptop, your access badge, and any company materials you have at home. Someone will be in touch about the logistics. But I didn't do anything wrong. The tears were coming faster now, and I almost felt bad for her. Almost. That's not for me to decide, Patricia said, her voice finally dropping to something resembling normal human volume, though it still had that edge of barely controlled rage. That's what the lawyers are determining. But regardless of whether you technically violated policy, you created a situation that exposed the firm to liability, and we can't have that. There was a pause, and I could hear Patricia typing in the background, probably already drafting emails to HR and legal and whoever else needed to be notified that they were about to have one fewer problem to worry about. For what it's worth, Patricia added, and she actually sounded almost human for a second, you were good at your job, but you made a really, really stupid choice. And in this business, stupid choices don't get second chances. Click. Call ended. Sarah stood there holding her phone like it was a bomb that had already exploded, staring at the screen as if she could somehow rewind the conversation and make it go differently. Her whole body was shaking, and she looked so small standing there in our kitchen in her college sweatshirt, unemployed and financially frozen, and finally understanding that actions have consequences. I took a sip of my coffee. Still hot, still delicious, still the perfect temperature for watching karma do its thing. Sounds like you had a rough call, I said, because I'm a monster, but I'm a polite monster. She looked at me, mascara running down her face in little black rivers, her hair still doing that flat and frizzy thing, her entire world crumbling around her. You did this? She said again, but this time there was no question in it, just flat certainty. I sent an email. You did the rest of this. This is all you, sweetheart. I just lit the match. You're the one who built the bonfire out of Instagram posts and bad decisions. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for air. No words came out. What could she say? That she was sorry? That she didn't mean it? That if she could go back and not post that photo, she would? Too late. Way too late. The train had left the station, crashed through several barriers, and was currently on fire while everyone stood around asking how this could have possibly happened. I finished my pancakes, rinsed my plate, and loaded it into the dishwasher. Because I'm not an animal, I still clean up after myself, even during a marital crisis. Sarah was still standing in the same spot, phone dangling from her hand, looking like someone had just explained to her that gravity was real and she'd been falling this whole time without realizing it. "I'm going to the office," I announced, grabbing my briefcase from its spot by the door. "Feel free to use the house phone if you need to call anyone. Your cell is probably about to blow up with texts from coworkers asking what happened, and you might want to manage that situation before it gets worse." "Worse," she repeated, like the concept of things getting worse was somehow still surprising. How could this possibly get worse? I paused at the door, briefcase in hand, and smiled. Not a mean smile, not a cruel smile, just the smile of someone who knows exactly how much worse things can get because he's planned for every contingency. "Oh, Sarah," I said softly, "we're just getting started." Then I walked out, closing the door behind me with a gentle click, leaving her standing in our kitchen with her dead career and her frozen accounts and the slowly dawning realization that she'd chosen the wrong partner. The thing about the internet is that it never forgets, never sleeps, and absolutely loves a good scandal. By Friday evening, Sarah's Instagram post had gone from mildly inappropriate workplace photo to Exhibit A in a cautionary tale about social media stupidity. I was sitting in my office reviewing depositions when Jennifer texted me a link with 3 skull emojis and the message, "Your wife is famous." The link led to Legal Ethics Today, a blog run by law professors who apparently had nothing better to do than dissect other people's professional disasters. The headline made me actually laugh out loud: "When Intimacy Meets Litigation, a case study in the ethics of oversharing." And there it was. Sarah's photo with Mark, blown up to full resolution, complete with that damning caption, "With my real partner this week." Below it, a thorough breakdown of how this single post had created conflicts of interest, potential discovery issues, and what the author called a masterclass in career self-destruction. The comments section was absolutely brutal. Someone had already nicknamed her Subpoena Queen, which honestly was pretty clever. Another commenter had created a whole thread about what not to do if you're having an affair with someone involved in litigation. People were screenshotting it, sharing it, turning it into memes faster than Sarah could possibly delete or damage control. She tried, of course. By the time I checked her Instagram that evening, the original post was gone, deleted in what I imagined was a panic-fueled frenzy of button mashing. But the internet doesn't work like that. Screenshots are forever. The Legal Ethics Today article had preserved it in amber, and now it was bouncing around Twitter, LinkedIn, and probably every group chat in every law firm across the country. My phone buzzed, a text from Mark. His number must have been in Sarah's phone and somehow gotten synced to our shared contacts before I'd frozen everything. The message was pure desperation. "They froze my accounts. What did you tell them?" I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? "Hey man, your girlfriend's husband is the lawyer destroying your life, and also, she was never actually going to leave me for you, she just liked the attention." Sarah had spent the entire day in the guest room, probably doom-scrolling through every mention of her name, watching her professional reputation get cremated in real time. I could hear her crying through the walls, which would have been more effective if I hadn't warned her exactly this would happen. By Saturday morning, the story had evolved. Someone had connected the dots between Sarah, Mark, and the Feldman Industries lawsuit. Legal Twitter was having a field day analyzing the ethics implications. A podcast called Lawyers Behaving Badly had apparently dedicated an entire emergency episode to it. The best part? Every article, every post, every comment carefully avoided using Sarah's full name, just calling her a professional at the firm or an associate connected to the defendant. But everyone who knew her knew. Her coworkers knew, her LinkedIn connections knew, everyone at every networking event she'd ever attended knew. The internet had done what it does best, taken a moment of poor judgment and turned it into a permanent digital monument to bad decisions. No amount of deleting, no PR campaign, no time would ever fully erase this. 10 years from now, someone could Google her name and find articles about the Instagram post that torpedoed 2 careers. I poured myself a whiskey and pulled up the Legal Ethics Today article one more time, reading through the comments like they were reviews for a movie I'd produced. 5 stars. Would watch the sequel. Monday morning, Sarah woke up and apparently decided that denial was a valid coping strategy. I watched from the kitchen as she got dressed in her navy sheath dress, her power outfit, the one she wore to important meetings when she needed to feel invincible. She did her makeup with the kind of precision usually reserved for neurosurgery, covering the dark circles and stress lines like war paint. "What are you doing?" I asked, genuinely curious about what delusion was currently running through her head. "Going to work," she said, like this was the most obvious thing in the world. "I need to explain everything in person. Fix this." I almost told her, almost explained, that HR doesn't work like that. That termination due to reputational risk isn't the kind of thing you fix with a heartfelt conversation and a cute outfit. But honestly, I wanted to see how this played out. "Good luck with that," I said, returning to my coffee. She left 20 minutes later, heels clicking with false confidence, probably rehearsing her speech in the Uber about how this was all a misunderstanding and she was a valuable employee who deserved a second chance. The text from Jennifer came exactly 47 minutes later. "Your wife just got escorted out of the building by security. It was spectacular." Apparently, Sarah had made it as far as the front entrance before her security badge flashed red at the gate. Declined. Access revoked. The corporate equivalent of "you can't sit with us." Security had been waiting. 2 guys in uniforms who looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else, holding an envelope marked with the kind of official stamps that mean your life is about to get legally complicated. Jennifer's source said Sarah had stood there in her power outfit trying to explain that there must be some mistake, that she was supposed to meet with HR to discuss the situation, that she had rights and procedures, and this couldn't be happening. The security guard, a guy named Marcus, who apparently had the patience of a saint, had very politely explained that her employment had been terminated, effective immediately, that the envelope contained all relevant documentation, and that she needed to return any company property she had at home within 24 hours. "But I need to talk to Patricia," Sarah had insisted, her voice getting higher and more desperate. "Miss Rodriguez is unavailable," Marcus had said, which was corporate speak for "your former boss is avoiding you like the plague because this situation is legally toxic." HR had sent someone down, a woman in her 50s who looked like she'd overseen approximately 10,000 terminations and had zero emotional investment in number 1001. She'd handed Sarah a box, an actual cardboard box, like something from a movie about corporate downsizing. Inside was the contents of her desk, a coffee mug with some inspirational quote, a few framed photos, a plant that was already half dead because Sarah had terrible follow-through with living things. Sarah had read the termination letter right there in the lobby, her hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. The best part, according to Jennifer's source, was the final paragraph, a demand for return of signing bonuses totaling $148,000, payable within 30 days, as stipulated in her employment contract under the Termination for Cause clause. She'd left carrying that box like it weighed 1,000 pounds, still wearing her power outfit that it turned out had exactly 0 power, walking past coworkers who suddenly found the floor very interesting. When she got home 2 hours later, I was still in the kitchen. She set the box down on the counter without saying a word, pulled out a sticky note that had been attached to the termination letter, and stared at it. I'd recognize my handwriting anywhere. The note said, "You chose your real partner. I chose peace." She looked at me, mascara starting to run again, that power outfit suddenly looking like a costume from a play that had closed after opening night. "You win," she whispered. I shook my head. "This isn't about winning, Sarah. This is about consequences." That evening, I was in our bedroom, my bedroom now, really, zipping up my suitcase when I heard her footsteps in the hallway. Slow, hesitant, like she was approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. Sarah appeared in the doorway, looking like a ghost of her former self. All that Instagram confidence completely evaporated. "Where are you going?" Her voice was small, broken, in a way I'd never heard before. "Hotel," I said, folding a shirt with more care than necessary. "My lawyer advised me to establish separate residency while we finalize everything. Makes the divorce cleaner." "Divorce?" She said it like it was a foreign word she was trying to pronounce for the first time. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll do whatever you want. I'll delete all my social media. Sarah. I stopped packing and looked at her directly. "You can't fix this. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to ignore my boundary. You chose to publicly disrespect our marriage. And now you're facing the consequences of those choices." Tears were streaming down her face now, and part of me, a very small, very distant part, felt something that might have been sympathy if it wasn't buried under 7 years of being taken for granted. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It was just a photo, just Instagram." "It's never just anything with you," I said, returning to my packing. "It was just Mark. It was just a work trip. It was just a photo. But it all added up to you choosing someone else over your husband and thinking there wouldn't be consequences because I was too boring, too understanding, too safe to actually do anything about it." She took a step into the room. "I was wrong about all of it. About Mark. About us." Her voice cracked. "I was so stupid." "Yeah," I agreed, because sugarcoating it now seemed pointless. You really were. The doorbell rang, cutting through the tension like a knife. Sarah looked confused, but I knew exactly who it was. I'd been tracking the courier on my phone for the last 20 minutes. "That'll be for you," I said, heading downstairs. The courier handed me an envelope. Certified mail. Signature required. The kind that means your day is about to get worse. I brought it back upstairs and handed it to Sarah, who opened it with shaking hands. Her face went white as she read. It was from Hendricks and Associates Legal Department, a formal demand letter for the return of her signing bonuses, totaling $148,000, due within 30 days per her employment contract. There were also several other financial penalties I'd noticed buried in her contract when I'd reviewed it last year. Prorated vacation time, unused stock options, even the cost of her company laptop that she'd somehow managed to drop and crack last spring. "I don't have this kind of money," she whispered, staring at the numbers like they might change if she looked hard enough. "I know," I said simply. "Your accounts are frozen, remember? And our joint accounts won't be accessible to you until the divorce is finalized, at which point you'll get whatever the prenup stipulates, which, spoiler alert, isn't much given the circumstances." She looked up at me, genuinely desperate now. What am I supposed to do? I picked up my suitcase, grabbed my car keys from the dresser. "I don't know, Sarah. Call Mark. Oh, wait, he's probably dealing with his own financial catastrophe right now. Maybe call your parents, your friends, your real partner." The cruelty in my voice surprised even me, but I was done being the nice guy, the understanding husband, the boring lawyer who just accepted whatever scraps of attention his wife threw his way. I walked past her, down the stairs, toward the front door, and whatever came next. Behind me, I could hear her starting to sob, real, ugly crying that echoed through our expensive house with its Scandinavian-inspired furniture and investment piece couch. My hand was on the doorknob when she called out one last time. "I love you. I know you don't believe me, but I do." I paused, considered my response carefully, then turned back to look at her standing at the top of the stairs in yesterday's clothes, mascara-stained and broken. "The problem, Sarah, is that you love the idea of me, the stability, the income, the safety net. But you didn't love me enough to respect me, to listen to me, or to choose me when it actually mattered." I opened the door, letting in the cool evening air. "You wanted your real partner. Congratulations. Now you get to figure out life without any partner at all." I walked out, closing the door with a gentle click that felt more final than any slam could have been. My car was packed, my hotel was booked, and my lawyer had already drawn up the divorce papers that would be filed first thing tomorrow morning. As I drove away from our house, soon to be just her house, then probably the bank's house once she couldn't make the mortgage payments, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, just quiet, simple peace. Sarah had posted that photo with Mark, calling him her real partner, while I was just the boring guy in the background. But as it turned out, my real partner was something she'd never understand: self-respect, boundaries, and the knowledge that I deserved better than someone who only valued me when there was no one else around. I drove toward my hotel, toward my divorce, toward whatever came next. And for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't looking back.